The 7 habits in this video skyrocketed my productivity and perhaps even more importantly, my happiness. Best of all, they're extremely simple and very easy to implement into your own life. And I think that you will see instant results the moment you do. So let's get into these habits right now. The first habit is creating a daily to-do list the night before. Now bear with me because you may have heard that one said before, but there are a few very good reasons why this has been so instrumental in my productivity and my happiness, and I think it will be in yours as well. The first reason is because by creating a daily to-do list, you allow yourself to be free of mental fatigue and mental clutter. Now it's very well known that the human brain can only focus on so many different things at any given time. It's also known that our attention is a very limited resource. Now what this means for you is that if your brain, even on a subconscious level, is constantly focused on what you have to do throughout the day, your upcoming tasks and your chores, then the quality of your current task is going to suffer, sometimes very dramatically, simply because you're not using your full brain resource power to be in the moment and focus on that task. So it's much better to put that burden, instead of on your brain, put it on your to-do list. Now I call this the act of zombieing out on a task, right? Because whenever I'm working off of my to-do list, I'm literally just like a zombie working mindlessly until the work is complete. And when I'm done with that task, I almost act like a character from Mortal Kombat, right? Getting ready for fatality, because I literally don't know what to do next until I consult my to-do list because I was so in the moment with my current task. Now the second reason why creating a daily to-do list the night before is important is because it will just merely increase your raw efficiency throughout the day. This means that you won't have to spend even a few minutes, very precious minutes perhaps, figuring out what you have to do next, and you won't break up your working momentum and your flow state by thinking about what's coming up next. Now the third and perhaps the most important reason why creating a daily to-do list the night before is so instrumental is because it will help you to avoid something known as hyperbolic discounting. Now hyperbolic discounting is merely the tendency for us to place the burden of our problems on our future self. Now you've probably experienced this anytime you are doing a task and you have run out of time to do it, or it's taking you longer than you thought it would to complete. Now this simply stems from an inability to think about the future. So what you're doing by creating the daily to-do list the night before is you're giving yourself the opportunity to accurately plan how much time you're going to have. You can look at the minutes and the hours that you will have available, and then you will actualize a plan that really makes sense with the amount of time that you will have available. Now what this means is that you will avoid hyperbolic discounting, and the days of feeling rushed and the days of feeling like you have not enough time to complete anything will be all but history. Now the second habit to increase your productivity and your happiness is to create weekly reoccurring goals. And these goals are a bit different than the daily to-do list that we just talked about because they don't really deal with menial or daily chores, and they don't change every single day, right? These goals are instead meant to be more broad focused, right? They're supposed to give you more motivation, make you feel inspired, and feel like despite everything else that's going on in your life, at least you are slowly or subtly improving in these few goals every single week. I'll give you some examples. In my personal life, with fitness, for example, we could say I want to do 50 push-ups every day for 5 days per week. Another one that I always have is study my flashcards 6 days per week. That's one that's on one of my lists right now. Now, if you're having trouble thinking of goals to put on your weekly recurring list, try to separate them into 2 categories. I call these the do's versus the do nots. So simply put, what do you want to do? Okay, I do want to floss my teeth 5-6 days per week. So that we put that on there. I do not want to eat candy 6 days per week or for 2 weeks straight. That can be a good goal. Now, as you know, with me, eating candy can be a big problem. Sometimes I have to duct tape my hands. I'll have to have someone throw me in a trunk so that I don't actually eat candy when I'm really feeling it. But I'm slowly finding that my self-control in this regard is increasing because of these weekly reoccurring goals. So they can be very instrumental. Now, also I want to note that if you need help organizing your goals into a spreadsheet or a habit tracker, you can download my custom habit tracking spreadsheet. Now this is a spreadsheet that allows you to create your own customized habit tracker with zero spreadsheet experience. It's completely free, easy to use. Check it out. I'll leave a link in the description below. Okay, now the third habit to increase your productivity and happiness is to physically warm up before you do any work or mental work. Now, we're not talking about running a marathon ride or doing any intense weightlifting, for example. Merely what I mean by this is 10 to 20 minutes of just sustained physical activity, with the whole goal to get your heart rate pumping, get the blood flowing to your brain, and really priming your brain for focused work. I like to play basketball. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll go down to the court for just 20 minutes, nothing intense, just shooting around, doing some dribbling drills, and that will help me get focused for actual work. Now, if you don't like basketball, here are some other ideas. You can go for a brisk walk. You can jog. You can even do some stretching or some light yoga. All of these things will work. Anything really that just gets your body moving for about 10 to 20 minutes, I find is really effective. Now, the fourth habit to drastically increase your productivity and happiness is my personal favorite, and that is reading a book instead of browsing social media. Now, there's a lot of reasons people don't do that these days, and I think, well, besides the main one that social media is just easily accessible and it's everywhere, the second biggest reason is that reading these days is seen as a bit of a gratuitous task, a grandiose task is what I meant to say. Something that where we think in order to have a good reading session, we need to read hundreds of pages at a time or read for hours on end in a single session. And that, simply put, isn't true. If you read, for example, for 5 minutes and you only get through one page, then I would count that as a success, as long as you've done that instead of browsing social media. Now, and I think that if you're being truly honest with yourself, you will probably agree with me that social media is generally a pernicious activity. It's not helping you in any way. It's probably making you more sad than anything. Now, that's not to say, right, that it doesn't have its benefits. Social media, we know, can be good for certain things, but overall, it generally makes you feel worse. Now, and also if you really think about it, reading a book and browsing social media are kind of the same thing, right? Because they're both forms of physical stimuli that you're reading via text or pictures. However, with reading a book, you are intaking good and positive information, whereby by browsing social media, you're intaking negativity, experiencing FOMO, and thinking that everyone else has more friends than you. And this generally doesn't turn out well. So that's the habit, is read a book instead of taking out your phone and browsing social media. Okay, now that's my rant. Let's move on to the fifth habit, which is journaling. So I find journaling to be a rather cathartic experience and something that helps to declutter my mind. And I like to use it as a brainstorming resource space where I just put down my major thoughts. Now, a lot of people are proponents of journaling daily, and I've done that before, but that's not something I've ever stayed consistent with just because it doesn't work for me. But I would implore you that if you haven't journaled before, try it. Experiment and see what works for you. Another option that you can try is nightly journaling. So that's where you journal for maybe 3 to 4 sentences about your day right before you go to bed. Helps you to relax and get you in a good state of mind to sleep. Regardless though of how you journal, just remember that the most important thing with this habit is that merely you're doing it and not necessarily that you're following a stringent method or format very precisely. Okay, now let's move on to the sixth habit to increase your productivity and happiness. That is to read news about your interests every single day. And this is something that is probably the most underrated habit on this list because it takes very little effort, but you'll get a huge amount of return for it. Now, I don't mean looking up a bunch of research papers, just 5 to 10 minutes, looking at what are the current developments in the things that you like. I like to do this in the morning because it puts me in a good mood, it gets my brain flowing, but it also gives me, very importantly, some discussion points and things that I can talk about with others throughout the day. And that's something that's really underrated. Personally, I found that sources like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal are good for world news. However, I like to read a lot of venture capital, business, and finance news. So I have 5 different newsletters that come into my inbox, my email every day. They have their own little folder and I just go through them at the beginning of the day. So you can also find a collection of newsletters that you gain. But again, with this habit, just like journaling, the most important thing is that you do it, and far less important that you look at specific sources every single day or do follow a specific method. Now, the seventh and final habit to increase your productivity and your happiness is to research something outside of your interests every day. Now, the whole idea with this habit is to get you to step outside of your comfort zone, even if just for a brief moment. Again, maybe 5 to 10 minutes of research time is what we're talking about here. And I found that personally, some of my biggest revelations, the biggest turning points in my life came from things that were outside of my circle of influence. These are things that I almost fell into by chance, but they had drastic changes over my entire life. And this is something that we're trying to help stimulate with this habit. So overall, the goal of the habit is to try to get your brain to avoid the confirmation bias and also maybe introduce a bit of serendipity into your life. Because remember, as the great Louis Pasteur once said, chance favors the prepared mind. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Those are our 7 habits. If you have ones that you would like to add or the ones that you think are helpful, leave them in the comments below. I'd love to see it. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Just remember that you're awesome and don't forget to smile, okay? Your willpower is the most important thing in your life because regardless of who you are, what you do, or what interests you have, you use it every single day because your willpower is very strongly linked to your blood glucose levels. However, your thoughts and emotions will have a very big impact on your willpower as well. Willpower is defined as impulse control or self-regulation.